So I'm Professor Cathy Martin from the John Innes Centre.
So my name is Professor Martin Warren and I'm the Interim Director at the Quadram Institute.
So my name is Susan Lanham-New. I'm Professor of Human Nutrition at the University of Surrey and Head of the discipline of Nutrition, Exercise, Chronobiology and Sleep.
So my name is Jennifer Ann Jarvis. I am the Food, Health, Human Studies Lead here at the Quadram Institute.
My name is Brenda Muyunki and I'm a third-year PhD student in Cathy Martin's lab and Martin Warren.
Vitamin D deficiency is a big problem.
What we know in the United Kingdom is that many people, and I'm talking over 20% of the population, are vitamin D deficient. That level goes up in the winter, and there are many people who remain vitamin D deficient for the entirety of the year. So vitamin D, it's a very unusual nutrient. Of course, it's called a vitamin, but it's not a ViTaL-D in the true sense of the word. It's actually a prohormone. And what I mean by that, it's the only nutrient where your main source of it is actually not diet. It is UV exposure. And that UV exposure comes, of course, directly from the sun. It has to hit directly onto the skin. So areas of northern latitude, as we are here, of course, in the United Kingdom, you will only make vitamin D. You'll only be in the right wavelength between April and September. So October to March, you will make no vitamin D. And what it relates to is it's what's called the zenith angle of the sun is of insufficient wavelength. And the best way of telling is from your shadow. So when your shadow is shorter than your height, as it is April to September, you will make some vitamin D. And then October to March, if you look at your shadows in the winter sun, it'll actually be double your height. Of course, in 2022, the nutrient was 100 years old. It was first identified in 1922, and British scientists played a very important role in its discovery, particularly Dame Harriet Chick did all the early work in Vienna, looking at the effect of vitamin D on rickets. So children who are growing, who don't get enough vitamin D, then they will get bone deformity. It would present itself in either knock knees or bandy legs, where the bones are not mineralized properly. So they're very soft, very painful. That was a very common occurrence right up until we introduced cod liver oil. Rickets is obviously still very prevalent in some countries. It's been on the increase in the United Kingdom. The adult form of vitamin D deficiency, or the adult form of rickets, would be osteomalacia. And so that would show up on a radiograph, again as poorly mineralized bone. But many people in the winter have mild osteomalacia that's not severe enough to show up on x-rays, but presents itself with bone ache, muscle ache, bone pain, lethargy, tiredness, susceptibility to infection. And often that is because vitamin D levels are low. What we also know is that vitamin D is implicated in osteoporosis, so that's the brittle bone disease, but it also has impact on other health outcomes. So we know that there is an increase in acute respiratory tract infections, so the common cold, if somebody is vitamin D deficient. We also know that the pancreatic beta cells, so those are the cells in the pancreas that are responsible for producing insulin, they require vitamin D to work. So if you are vitamin D deficient, that may put you at risk, a greater increase in risk of diabetes. And it's also been implicated in other health outcomes, such as heart disease and cancer.
Its metabolites act as steroid hormones, and they're thought to impact depression and neurodegenerative diseases very significantly. And deficiency or insufficiency in winter months, when there's not enough sun, may well be underpinning the SAD, the seasonally adjusted depression. So it's very important, and a very large proportion of the British population suffer from vitamin D insufficiency in the winter months.
What we also know from other studies that have been done is that we have individuals who are of darker skin, so ethnic communities, so particularly South Asian, Black Afro-Caribbean, are particularly at risk of vitamin D deficiency. We do have dietary sources of vitamin D, so examples would be eggs, fish, meat, fortified products. But what we don't have are any plant sources of vitamin D. The only other non-animal source would be mushrooms. Those are fungi, of course, and it's the ergostrol in the mushrooms that does the conversion of UV to make it so that it is rich, but it's a vitamin D2 content. So you have two forms of vitamin D, so D2, then what you also have is vitamin D3. When you look at the studies that have been done, and including a very large one from our own group at the University of Surrey that was funded by the BBSRC, what that showed is that vitamin D3 is so much more effective in raising vitamin D levels than what D2 is.
So the vitamin D study is an exciting project where we're trying to understand whether we can use plants which have been biofortified so that they start to produce a form of vitamin D, and see whether those plants actually provide extra nutrition. So this is a really exciting project because it brings together a range of different people with different expertise. So we're working very much with the John Innes Centre because they've developed plants which make this provitamin D3 molecule. We're working with experts in Surrey who have vast experience in the study of vitamin D and its health benefits and how it can be enhanced. And we're using the facilities within Quadram, the human studies team, and all of their expertise to put together this study so that we can really start to answer these fundamental questions as to whether these plants are going to have a beneficial impact on human health.
No plants make vitamin D. Provitamin D, which is the precursor that we make as well, is an intermediate in some plants, and in those plants that use cholesterol as a precursor for making important defense compounds, then you can get provitamin D. Notably amongst those plants that are foods are the solanaceous plants such as potato, pepper and aubergine and tomato. But it doesn't accumulate, so all we did was make it accumulate, so we blocked a pathway to make it accumulate.
We used gene editing technique to make these vitamin D enriched lines by blocking the cholesterol pathway. With the technology that we have now, using CRISPR-Cas9, you can make very precise gene edits without affecting any other metabolites in the tomato or any other pathway in the tomato. So you can just have like vitamin D enriched lines.
We can take a gene of interest and we use some tools which actually come from bacteria or archaea, so from prokaryotic organisms, but they can be used to snip out pieces of DNA specifically, and that's a process called gene editing. This mutation could definitely have occurred in nature. There could be a mutation out there that occurred naturally in tomato, which accumulates large amounts of provitamin D.
So this project involves tomatoes that have been precision bred using very specific genetic techniques, which allow us to introduce a mutation into the plants, which could easily be done through laborious breeding, but actually been using modern genetic approaches allows it to happen much faster. And this allows us to stop a specific reaction taking place in the plant, which then leads to the formation of this provitamin D3 molecule. So this is different to, for instance, some of the GM approaches which involve putting in trans genes or foreign genes into the plant. So we're not putting in any extra DNA. All we're doing is stopping a normal metabolic process from taking place, which then leads to the accumulation of provitamin D3. What we now want to see is whether that accumulation of provitamin D3 in the tomato, whether that can be used to enhance human health. And the way that we're doing that is actually taking the tomatoes, exposing it to UV light to convert the provitamin D3 into vitamin D3, and then seeing whether that has the health benefits that we predict.
What we want to know is, do these tomatoes provide enough vitamin D
So the ViTaL-D study will be investigating the effect of the precision-bred tomatoes.
And so the first part of the trial the study is to look at whether consuming that tomato actually raises vitamin D level.
So the study is to see whether we can take the tomatoes, treat them with UV light, and then make a soup out of them.
So these tomatoes are like the tomatoes that we're going to use for the human study, and they are vitamin D biofortified tomatoes. So we're going to compare the bioavailability of vitamin D from the tomatoes, and we're hoping to make very nutritious tomatoes that you can eat and meet your daily intake of vitamin D without having to take supplements.
And so we'll be looking at men and women with vitamin D insufficiency, and then having a variety of soups. One soup with the precision-bred tomatoes that have not been UV treated, so it's something that you would literally get right off the vine, and then another soup where we will be doing the UV treatment, and then we're going to also compare it to a normal tomato soup where we supplement that with vitamin D3, and then we're going to have one that has just the conventional, or what we call wild type tomato. So the amazing and unique feature about being where we are on the Norwich Research Park, we have John and his center, which is right next door, and we literally get the tomatoes from their greenhouses directly to our clinical research facility kitchen, where it's a fully certified food grade kitchen. And so we're able to take these freshly harvested tomatoes literally within an hour of harvest and make them into our soup. And so from that, the tomatoes are freeze dried, and then we make them on the clinical research facility kitchen, and then they are packaged. We'll be asking participants to take a soup every day, and then this tomato soup can be eaten any time of the day with salt and pepper or whatever our participants want to use to season it. Then we also ask that that you measure your outdoor exposure, and so we also want to make sure that you let us know how much sun exposure you get, as well as we'll be providing these UV trackers to also help measure your UV exposure. This is a 21-day study. Study visits will be conducted at the Norfolk Clinical Research Facility, staffed by registered nurses. ViTaL-D study involves 5 study visits to our clinical research facility. In these longer visits, we'll be having questionnaires and blood collections and urine collections. So the participants that we are aiming to recruit for our study are men and women who have vitamin D insufficiency. So, and a lot of people don't know what insufficient is, so don't worry, we can do that for you. So we're going to be looking at recruiting participants who live 40 miles or surrounding our Quadram Institute, so largely in Norfolk. And then of course there are some other kind of factors that may exclude you from the study, but we can go over that during your study talk. So
the biofortified gene-edited tomato presents itself as a very exciting potential source of vitamin D from many different strands. First of all, it would mean that you are increasing your vegetable or your fruit and vegetable intake, because you're taking a plant source of vitamin D. What you're also doing is taking a vegan-friendly D3 source, and we know that D3 is more effective at raising vitamin D levels than what D2 is. As a registered nutritionist, we advise is to try to get your diet through a food approach. So to have something like a biofortified gene-edited tomato, that would open up the opportunity for increasing our vitamin D intake without taking a supplement. And it would give us that opportunity for increasing vitamin D intakes in the United Kingdom population, but doing that very safely and as part of a whole food approach that follows that Eat Well guide, the government recommendation of Eat Well guide. The National Institute of Clinical Excellence estimate that as a United Kingdom we spend £100 million per year on prescribing vitamin D supplements. So obviously anything that can be done through a food approach would have a long-term, benefit from the point of view that we're trying to achieve that vitamin D intake through whole foods as opposed to actually just taking a supplement.
We'll learn so much about the importance of just the different types of vitamin D. It would be wonderful if we can understand a little bit better how that metabolizes differently in different people.
When you undertake human studies, of course, what you have to do is you have to plan the experiments carefully. And you have to ensure that you get enough participants so that the data that you get from the study actually has real meanings. Because what we want to do is to have enough people so that we can get enough data to show that there is a real effect or not, because this is key as to whether this is really going to be a successful or whether this project will have a very successful outcome.
I'd say go for it. Advances in science are made by people taking part in the research, and it will be a very interesting study, and it will be interesting to be part of it.